Hey everyone. Today, me and Wren are going to be talking about their graphic novel, The House on Caple Hill. And then we're going to be talking about specifically the nine pieces of the soul, which make up a very important part of their graphic novel. So, Wren, can you tell us a little bit about the role of the nine pieces of the soul in your graphic novel and how we're going to be going through these nine pieces in this podcast?
Absolutely. So in my graphic novel in progress, The House on Caple Hill, we follow the adventures of a young woman named Josephine who is thrown out of not only her time but her timeline, and ends up jumping through jumping through time and through parallel universes, trying to get back to where she started. But along the way, she meets her parallels in these universes who are, in fact, pieces of her own person. And meeting them and coming in and out of their individual stories changes her as well, physically and as internally as a person. So the nine pieces come from a set of ancient Egyptian beliefs about what makes up a person or a consciousness, a human being, sort of. Some of these things, like one of the pieces, the Ba, can be held by inanimate objects, and that's sort of like something's character, but we'll get to that in a second. But for the most part, this is applicable to living, sentient identities, as I've chosen to call them, because I feel that the English word a soul, it has a lot of very vague meanings, like, is your soul a ghost? Is a soul your life spark? Is it your intellect and personality? Like, what is it? We, in the West, we don't really have we don't have a clear vision of what it is that separates, just a body from a living person. But I feel like these nine pieces that we're going to go over in the Egyptian beliefs really say in a lot more detail what a lot of cultures in the West have had trouble articulating about the human experience and what makes us, what makes us people in the end.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, because how did you do your research also?
So I had a lot of prior experience with Egyptian mythology. I was very much a little Egyptologist as a tween and teen, and I read a lot of the mythology, and I listened to a lot of lectures about ancient Egyptian history and culture. And I still remember one of the things that struck me the most as a kid was the beliefs about name magic, and the Egyptians very much believed in magic, and that magic was not just, sorcery. It was an art. It was a healing. It was a self-expression. It was, it was a part of every person. Your magic is a part of you, and that gets into a lot of these different pieces and parts that we're going to discuss. But the one that really struck me as a kid was the beliefs about the name, that the Egyptians would name their children, and they would give them two names: the name that they went by, that everyone knew them by, and then they would have a secret name that basically just that child and the gods would know. And this was a form of protection, in the sense that if someone tried to curse that child, but they didn't know the secret name, it wouldn't work. And it was also, this is your individuality. This is your power that's unique to you. Protect it, and only share it with people that will not use it against you.
Mm-hmm. I see. So I think a lot of this ties into the theme of identity that you will be exploring in your graphic novel.
Yes, the entire novel is about, it's about self-discovery, it's about healing, um, it's about finding one's identity, and not only like discovering the truest identity, but and not just accepting it and embracing it, but celebrating it.
Mm-hmm. And each of the 9 parts will help Josephine discover herself and celebrate who she really is, right?
Yes. And it's been a little bit difficult deciding what order to put them in, just because there's so many, and there's so that presents a lot of opportunity for beautiful stories to tell. So each one of these is going to get its own volume within the collective series of the graphic novel, its own, I guess you could consider it a chapter. And with each one, we're going to see each piece from beginning to end. It's not just we're going to pop in the middle when Josephine gets there, because we want to see what each character has had to experience and live with, and how those things tie back to Josephine in the end.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So which one do you want to begin with?
Um, well, we could do them. I think we should do them probably in the order that I sent them to you in the email, just because I feel like it's a really good way to go from, something very concrete, we're familiar with this, to the more abstract ideas towards the end.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the first one is Ket, which is the physical form. So that's definitely the one that we're the most familiar with.
Yes. So the ket is the body, which is in and of itself considered a part of your being, your consciousness. It houses all the different parts of your spirit. It houses your, and the Egyptians, of course, believed that your internal organs also represented different pieces of your soul. So the Egyptians are very famous for their lavish burial rituals, carefully separating out the 5 cardinal organs, if you might call them that, and mummifying the body and preserving everything, and making sure that person had everything they needed for their soul to come back to, essentially, because they believed that your body was going to be needed again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
there was a lot of care taken to make sure that that the physical form, which had so much dignity for them, and was and deserved so much respect in their culture and in their eyes. They took a lot of care to make sure that that was in the best condition as possible, so that when the other pieces of the soul returned, it would be ready for them.
Right. And the Ket is Josephine, right?
Yes, the ket is Josephine. She, the, I don't know. It's a little difficult to explain the um, the sort of irony of that, because I don't know. I felt like people always told me I looked like the fashion plates from the late Victorian era, and kind of thing. And it's that's a very superficial sort of visual pun, if you will. But for her to be the body, uh, the physical form, means that she has the most to fill in.
Hmm.
She
That makes
has she
sense.
how aware do you think a body is of all the things that goes on inside it? Like, we don't even think about, we're not conscious of the things that our body does to keep us alive, like breathing and our heartbeat and stuff. How much less conscious are we of what our body does to support our souls? So I felt like that was a really good place to start, because she has so much to learn.
That's actually really a great allegory or analogy, I should say. It really is, this is how she starts out on her journey, like, on her wedding day. And then as she departs, she goes into the different aspects of the soul from that shell. Because as we talked about in the previous episode, she was always living according to what other people imposed on her in society. So that kind of itself is like a shell.
It is. And if you really look at the way women, there was this weird contrast of women being respected in the sense that they were supposed to be given the utmost courtesy. You never swore in front of a woman, you held doors for them, that kind of thing. and there was but that again is a very superficial reverence, because a woman's real value back then was to provide heirs to a family, to keep a family name. So in the
Exactly.
end, their value was boiled down to their bodies, which is really sad.
Absolutely, right. And, in many feminist literature, there has been a critique of how women have been seen in many cultures, how women were mostly seen for their physical bodies rather than what they can actually offer in terms of, their intellect.
Yeah, their capability of achievement is just overshadowed by their ability to reproduce. And it's it's kind of it's one of many cruel double standards, because men obviously are not limited to their ability to procreate. That's not the measure of a man. But for however, so many hundreds, thousands of years, that has been the the limit, the value of a woman,
Mm-hmm.
the most that they could
Exactly.
contribute.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Moving on to the second element, which is ib, the literal or metaphorical heart.
Yes. One of the things I loved about this is that it is both. Specifically, there's not this separate idea like we have in the West of, like, if you see an image of a heart shape, and what we kind of take that to mean, what we feel things with, you know versus if we see an image of the organ, which is a little bit scary to some, and maybe kind of edgy and cool to others, but still represents very different ideas. There is no separation for the Egyptians. The heart is for them the physical as well as the abstract seat of emotion and thought and will.
Mm-hmm. And what's the feather of truth? In your notes, it says that it was weighed against the feather of truth.
Yes. So, one of the many trials that a soul went through in the underworld after death was for the heart, the ib, to be weighed on a scale by Anubis against a feather called the feather of truth. And the feather of truth is a representation of all that is pure and good. And if your heart was heavier than the feather, it would be cast aside and eaten by a horrible monster, which I believe had like the head of a crocodile and the paws of a lion and the back of a hippopotamus or something like that. And but if your soul was pure enough that it weighed lighter than the feather of truth, or equal to it, then you are allowed to pass through and enter into the afterlife, enter into communion with the other gods in the afterlife. And it's also passage that's transformative, in the sense that the ib can then become the sahu, which we will discuss later, which is the most pure, the most stripped away. No matter what else changes about you, this is who you are.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Right. And is this the second one chronologically? So Josephine is going to move from the physical aspect to the ib.
I think um I think actually she's going to run into her ka second. But the ib, again, this is kind of a thing where we do have a concept of the heart not only as a physical piece of our body in the West, but we also understand, we have kind of a cultural understanding that the heart is also where we feel things, and part of where our willpower and our thought come from. We can feel it there. We have this cultural understanding that that's how it works. So I thought that would be the next part to discuss here, just because we have a little bit more familiarity with it and we can just elaborate on that.
I see. Right. And the next part is ka.
Yeah, and the Ka is I think a really lovely piece of theology, in the sense that even in the West, we do have kind of an idea of the spark of life that would separate a cadaver from a living person. But in Egypt, it gets much more intimate than that, because your Ka is not just the general spark of life. It's the one that was created alongside your Ket before you were born. The sculptor god would sit and make the clay form of your body and make the form of your Ka at the same time, so that they always fit perfectly together. It doesn't belong to anybody else. It's nobody else's spark of life, only yours.
Hmm. I see. So this is another aspect of individuality that we will be
It is.
exploring.
It is. Some people have described the Ka as the outside of the mask, the you that others experience, because we can't actually see ourselves from other people's eyes. We experience ourselves differently. The Ka is what others experience of us. And another thing that I thought was really interesting about the Ka was that it also um, must be offered food and nourishment to be kept alive even after the body is dead. People would place food offerings in tombs for the Ka of people who had passed.
I see. So what happens if the cod doesn't get enough nutrients after
If
death?
if the Ka goes without food, I'm pretty sure I did hear in a podcast that it would die into itself, and that person could never come back. So it was imperative, a lot of these rites and rituals for the Egyptians were very serious matters. This, they treated this, I think, with even more gravity than we treat funerals in our time, in the sense that they legitimately truly believed that if they neglected their dead, they could never return to the living, and they really would never see them again.
Oh, I see. And that's why, they built all these big tombs and everything, right? Especially
Yes,
for the
that's
pharaohs.
especially for the pharaohs, who were themselves emissaries and representatives of Ra and incarnations of Ra. They had
Hmm.
to, there was no letting that go. There was no forgetting about it. It was hugely important.
Hmm. How about people who were lost to the sands? Like, sometimes at museums, you get to see these really dried up, not really mummies, but people who just died in the sand dunes. And then you see, like, someone who's dried up. So I guess in their
Well,
worldview, that person's ka and the other aspects don't exist anymore.
I, you know, that would, I'm pretty sure that would be the case. Someone dying of exposure like that and not going through mummification would probably indicate that that person was either a slave or not, high enough in the socioeconomic totem pole to warrant being given a burial and honoring the parts of their soul, which is, for as much as we can expound on how beautiful these beliefs that the Egyptian had, there is still, the the cruelty of their culture that was slavery, that was, quintessentially a caste system. Um, and those things can't be ignored. But to answer your question, yeah, if someone, when you see someone coming from that part of the world who has not been through any of the rites of mummification, you are correct. That person, in the eyes of their culture, would be dead permanently. There would be no, they had lost the pieces of their soul because no one had cared for them after death.
Hmm. I see. So it was mostly, pharaohs, nobles, and other people who did go through those rites.
Yes, mostly it was very wealthy people. And sometimes that wealth extended to a sort of bourgeoisie of merchants and maybe very wealthy, very respected tradesmen, or maybe astrologers, that kind of thing. But you had to be very important, and you had to have people who cared about you. Which was another interesting thing, was I found that some of these almost seem to resemble some of the beliefs about Dia de los Muertos, and how quintessentially part of the human experience is having enough people in your life care about you that they will keep you alive after you die.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because back then especially people were more communal.
Yes, it was these these were community cultures. This was, people couldn't afford to be as isolated as we can be today.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And then moving on to the next part is Ba, which is usually personified as a bird with its face or with its owner's face or head. So kind of like Horus, right?
Yeah, a bit like that. Well, no, actually, because Horus has the body of a man but the head of a falcon.
Right. So it's
um
the opposite way
it's
around.
the opposite,
Yeah.
yes. And the Ba could also change forms, but to different birds, which I thought was very interesting, because they might need a different bird's abilities or shape to get through different obstacles in the netherworld. But the Ba is a person's personality. It's what makes them unique. It's the inside of the mask, the you that you experience only. And the Ba also is the part of your soul that I think, it was interesting to me, because there are only a couple of these that can affect things in the world of the living. And there are references to the Ba traveling between the worlds of the living and the dead, and often visiting the places that a person loved in life.
Mm-hmm. So they're kind of like a ghost, right?
A little bit, but there are a couple other parts that you could say are ghosts, in the sense that they affect things in the human world. The Ba is, I would say, the more benevolent of them. Um, they're not going to be the ones that are causing trouble or haunting people. They're just, peacefully visiting places they liked, and checking in on the people they left behind, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, so basically it's kind of like someone's mental landscape.
I would say it's more like their um as opposed to the word mental, I would use the specific word psychological, or perhaps emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Ba and inanimate objects could have Ba, you know. So like, as much as a stuffed toy can have a personality of its own, or your individual stuffed toy you had as a child could have its own personality and character. That's kind of what your Ba is. It's that thing that makes you unique in yourself, no matter what physical, or whether the Ka is there or not, your Ba will be the same.
Mm-hmm. And how does that contrast with the next aspect we're talking about, which is the Ak, or the effective self?
The Ach is almost more specifically a person's magical essence, like their power to affect changes, even just through sheer willpower. Like their the magic that is in that person and comes with that person is their Ach. And the Ach was another piece that people would make offerings to. But they did this and prayed to the Achs almost as they would to the gods. And almost, I think some people have made the comparison that an Ach was kind of like a saint. They had special things that they were capable of, and they were specialized. Um, so people, if people believed that your magical essence was powerful enough, they could make an offering to your Ach, and ask of you, as an able Ach of Ra, to grant them a good harvest, or a son, or whatever it was. And some of them were a little bit like, they were definitely kind of bribery, like, I'll give you this and this and the other if you'll give me, whatever thing it is I'm praying for. And the Ach was another piece that was said to travel between lands of the dead and living, frequently, although more specifically, the Ach is said to be allowed to travel in Ra's sunboat, which is like the highest of high honors.
Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting how it's not possessed by every identity. Ox are earned by observing the correct rituals after death and passing the judgment of the feather of truth. So only a very select few can travel in the Ra's sunboat.
Exactly. You had to be very special and very powerful indeed to ride in Ra's boat. Um, I think, and I'm gonna try and find more evidence to support this, but there being the nine, this triplicate of triplicates, you'd almost look at them and see the sort of heart, mind, and body of the mind, the heart, mind, and body of the heart, and the heart, mind, and body of the body, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that the Ah would almost kind of go with the Ka in a sense that they are an energy form, they are a source of power to a person. And I may have forgotten to make a note about this, but there was a ceremony called the opening of the mouth that was how you released the Ka from the Kets and allowed it to travel. And I believe after the judgment, after the weighing of the feather, the Ka would almost, in a Schrodinger's cat kind of way, be also the Ach, but still be the Ka itself as well.
Mm-hmm. I see. And to add to the kind of ghost-like aspects that we see here, the next one is called, is it pronounced shut or shoot?
Shoots.
Shoots, yes. So it's also kind of like a ghost because it says it's the literal and metaphorical shadow, tangible proof of an identity's existence and impact on the world around them.
Yes. I really loved this when I finally found out about this, because every Egyptian child was taught, if they doubted, like, am I even real? Can I really change anything? They were told, look for your shadow, because that is the proof that you affect the world. And the shadow is also the servant of Anubis. So there's already a cultural designation that the shut is the tie to the wild, dark magic that we might not always be conscious of, but we do always have.
Mm-hmm. Right. And is it more neutral? It's not as positive, right?
Um, that's a good question. I guess you could say it is neutral. The shoot, it's there to serve you, and it's
Mm.
there, it's not necessarily a spy. It's not, I don't think there was really any negative connotation necessarily that came with the shoot. um I think people might get that idea just because Anubis is kind of, I think in a lot of Western culture, people kind of misappropriate Anubis as a dark, sinister figure, but he wasn't really, because as a god of the burial, yes, he was serious, but he wasn't evil. I think that's really where people kind of mix him up with Set, who is the one who overthrew Osiris, and he's kind of the big baddie of Egyptian mythology.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I asked because it says shoots represents the bond to the mystical, the unknowable, and the dark and the wild. The rest of it sounds neutral, but the dark and wild kind of suggests that there might be a darker side to it.
There may be a darker side to it in this, in very much in the vein that the Fae of Celtic mythology and folklore could have a darker side, that their magic came at a cost. that there were laws and rules that were even more ancient than people cared to acknowledge, that did exist, but did you want to use them?
That's true. Mm-hmm.
So there's almost a little bit of the, in the sense that, like, in original adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, even Dr. Jekyll isn't that great of a person. Like, the darkness exists in all of us, but how and when we choose to use it is part of what defines us as a person.
Absolutely. And then we have the secum, which is an identity's divine energy.
Yes, that one has been very tricky to research, because the places where it's referenced, in particular, I believe in the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, don't give us a whole lot to go by. But the way that I look at it, there are people who will talk about, like, the energy of the universe that's in everyone and in everything, and it eventually goes back to itself and becomes something else and just keeps continuously going, because that's what the universe does. And the way, until I can find more definitive information, I am defining the sechem as that piece of the cosmos that courses through you as an individual, and will go back to the rest of the cosmos and become another piece of the cosmos and just keep going in that cycle forever and ever. But that in and of itself makes the sechem a source of power and a source of life, that it can just keep reincarnating forever.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter whether you've died or not. It's just always there, right?
Yes, exactly. It's always there. And a couple places referenced it also as a place where the gods dwell, which I think really just goes a little deeper into a piece of the cosmos, a piece of the divine that we don't always understand, or we might not necessarily be conscious of, but we do have that divinity, and we do have that place within us that is a temple, whether, no matter what we decide is that temple is used to worship.
Right. And the next one is very important. It's Wren, or the true or secret name. And would you say this is kind of like the climax of your series?
Oh, that is a really good question. It probably, I would say that, yeah, I would say that it's going to be at least in the last three. I'm trying I'm going to try to group them into three sets of three if I can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that one is really extremely important. It's the belief of theirs that has been with me the longest, and the Wren, the name magic, is just so important in the Egyptian culture, and I think in other cultures as well. There are a lot of folk tales, even things like Rumpelstiltskin, where solving the puzzle and saving the day depends on finding out somebody's true name and really being able to, because it's a matter of gaining power over that person knowing their name.
Mm-hmm.
um and there's so much that goes with that, and again, kind of tying back to the Dia de los Muertos thing, this is another place where you do have to rely on other people to keep you alive, because to keep your identity, your consciousness alive even after death, meant that people had to remember your name. So the idea was to and I do need to get a little bit clearer on this, because I think that it wasn't the Wren or the secret name that people did this with, but it was very important for people to protect their names with cartouches, which they often wore in jewelry in the form of rings or pendants.
Mm-hmm.
And also in any inscriptions that were going to try to stand the test of time on temple walls or tomb walls. to protect the name in a circle, which was also the circle that encompassed the cartouche was its shield, its protection. And the idea was to put your name in as many places where other people could see and remember you as possible, to keep your second final death.
Right. And I think this really leads us to, I think, the conclusion of the series, which is Sa or Sahu. And I would say that's kind of like the denouement of the series, right? Kind of like a resolution of Wren, because after discovering the
Yes,
true name, you discover the heart of the core of the identity.
exactly. That's an excellent way to put it. And that that is really an excellent way to put it. The Sahu Sa is, like you said, it's the core of your personality and your consciousness and your identity. You can't have that until you've discovered, until you've really sat down with the other pieces and allowed them to develop, and allowed that strips away all the things that aren't you.
Exactly. Right. And the Sahu was also believed to be part of an identity's consciousness that made any unfinished business in the world of the living known, haunting those who wronged them in life. So this is another connection to the idea of a ghost. And this is, I think, more solid than the other ones because they actually do something, not just, kind of visit the places they loved.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and with the Ach, those will other people to do things, whereas the Sahu was yours and would exact your will on other people, not the other way around. So this is also, and I think really is a great a great bookend to
Hello?
the story about having to live under some have hello.
Hello? Sorry, something happened and I couldn't hear you.
Oh, that's odd. I'm so sorry. It could be my internet connection out here.
Yeah, it says that your network bandwidth is low.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so I think we got cut off after I asked my question. So I only heard a tiny bit of your response and most of it was just silence.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's not your fault. I think it's the internet's problem.
I I always say it's like cats. The internet has its own priorities. But yeah, I think the Sahu is a really good bookend to the story, having begun about living under the expectations of others, because the Sahu is the part of you that um, will never have to live under other people's expectations. It never has to change itself or compromise itself for anybody else.
Exactly. So that's a great way to end the series. From the very beginning, where, Josephine is basically the product of people's expectations, and to the very end.
Exactly, where she doesn't need anybody's expectations
And as you said in the
or
notes, oh, sorry.
permission to be who they are. Oh no,
Exactly.
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, because there was a lag and then I couldn't hear you, so I thought you stopped. But yes, I said, yeah, the notes, it says that, as each piece's story reaches its conclusion, Josephine will take on the physical traits of each one of the pieces of the soul, ending the series as an androgynous, non-binary entity who goes by the name River, but whose Wren is only seen in Ogham script.
Yes. So it was very important to me that Josephine coming into contact with the other pieces of herself had not only an internal, a psychological, and emotional effect on her, but also a physical change as well. And because not all of these characters are going to be female, I wanted to make it very clear that she, as a complete person, also is not necessarily female, but non-binary, and chooses to take a name that is a little more abstract. Um, we're going to see in a couple of these stories a lot of ties to rivers and springs of water and other um, forces of nature that shape who and what uh, the person will come to know as River. The pieces that comprise them as a magical entity as well as a physical and emotional consciousness.
Right. And does River go back to their original timeline, or do they create their own timeline and stay there?
So I think what I'm planning on happening is that River will go back to their original timeline, because they just sort of end up there like, well, I've been working towards this entire time. And they go back and it's, it's the wedding day, and their fiance just kind of looks at them and says Josephine. And and there's a recognition that the person he once knew is in there, but they're a completely different human being at this point, and the happy ending that would have been a happy ending for Josephine isn't really a happy ending for River. And River is aware of this, and decides to kind of keep journeying through time and space and make their own path.
Ah, I see. So they do go back, but then they choose to go on to other places and discover more aspects of
Exactly.
themselves, right?
Or at least help others unify themselves.
Mm-hmm. So is it a special power at that point, or is it still more of a metaphysical journey?
I think towards the end it will become a power, in the sense that, the first few times, and many of the times we see Josephine try to get back, uh, the results are not what she intended. She ends up in other places and in other times that she never meant to be at all. Um, but in the end, she'll have done it so many times that by the time she becomes River, it's not really a an ordeal anymore. It's, well, I guess it's time to go.
Mm-hmm. Right. And can you clarify the importance of River's Wren only being seen in Ogham script?
Yes. So Ogham script is an ancient Celtic script that it looks like hash marks that are read either from the bottom to the top or from the left to the right. And some people believe that these were used to confuse or hide messages from invading Romans in Ireland and other Celtic speaking nations back in ancient times. Um, so the importance there was that I wanted the name to be linguistically hidden, because it's such a powerful and secret thing. So it would be leaving the reader with a little bit of a mystery, uh, which, if they did their research into Ogham, of course they can figure it out. But also if they're, satisfied as partakers of stories that I've given them everything they need to know to get through the story, uh, it's not going to leave them dissatisfied. And I wanted to use Ogham in particular because the story is mostly going to be taking place in worlds and lands and universes that borrow a lot of Celtic history and Celtic culture. And there will be other things as well, some Germanic folklore and mythology. And of course, we'll be spending some time with Egyptian spirits as well. But I did want to have a uh, a reference to the more ancient Celtic cultures, which can be really hard to find um, just because of what's been preserved for archaeologists is very limited. So I felt like the Ogham script was a great way to go, to keep that sense of mystery that we might, have also experienced with something like Egyptian hieroglyphs, but within the framework of Celtic culture.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, yes, the Wren is really quite hidden then. And basically, it's only going to be in Ogham script. And I guess it appears in a panel. And then do we get the implication that it is River's Wren? Or is it mostly like told directly to us that it is their Wren?
We will have an inclination that it is River's Wren. That's going to be part of a plot point within the volume that will be the Book of Wren.
Hello?
Did I go again?
Yeah.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think you're back now, so don't worry.
Okay. Hopefully we can get through to the end before it does it again.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah, so that's how the series is going to progress.
Yeah, and there is still a lot that has to be filled in, but these pieces are here to give us some framework so that when we come back and and talk about other characters and plot points in the story, that our listeners will have a reference point of, well, wait, where does this character fit into the grander scheme of the narrative?
Mm-hmm. I think on your Instagram, I think around a month ago, you did share one of the concept arts you had of one of the pieces of the soul.
I did. So that one is actually going to be the Ba, and he is a river fae, a river spirit, and he is the spirit of a river branch called Melindur, who is a branch of the river Hraidal, and he is captured by. Basically, this chunk of the story is going to be set in what looks like a very 900s to 1000s AD, sort of, what's the word? Oh heavens. Uh, Invasions, much like what the Holy Roman Empire was doing to acquire, and expand that empire.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it is going to be a little bit twisted, however, because these militant forces are not necessarily going to be fighting on behalf of a church, but on behalf of a quote unquote God king who has sort of appropriated a religion in the name of gaining power. But this militant force will come through Melindur's country and capture him, not exactly knowing what he is, and by converting him and baptizing him with holy water, sort of strip away what makes him fey, at least for a time. And that is, it's going to be a rather painful journey, but in the end, a very cathartic one.
Right. And Josephine meets him, but then does she talk to him, or is it mostly like her observing his actions, like, like as if she was part of the audience?
Well, so the way I want the formatting to work is that we're going to see Melindor's experience of life as if it's its own book at first. And then after a certain portion, when we get to it, when we reach a certain plot point in his story individually, is when Josephine enters into his universe and is able to affect change in his timeline.
Ah, I see. So we get both aspects. We get both viewpoints.
Exactly. I wanted to have a feeling with these books that it wasn't that, while yes, these are different pieces of the same person, we're not necessarily following the same character's formulaic adventure over and over again, a la Harry Potter, or, so you want to be a wizard. Because, while having a character that the audience is familiar with is important and can ground them into the story, they don't need it immediately. They can, like, I know that even I, as a reader, often prefer for a book to start from somebody else's perspective, so that I can, expand how do I view the story and the situation before perhaps the character that I'm more familiar with enters the story, and I can say, oh, I remember them. Oh, there must be a reason they're here, so that there's a little bit more to puzzle together and piece together as you read.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also really good because it fits into the theme of the different parts. So you really get to see Josephine herself, as well as the different parts and how they are like, different from herself.
Exactly. You get to see how their experiences shape them, and how their lives dictate who they become, um, and how, what challenge that poses to Josephine when she does enter their timelines, and she has to find some way to resolve, whatever struggle, whatever trial it is that they've been going through.
Mm-hmm. Final question. Will each of the books have their own color scheme?
Uh, I've given that a lot of thought, and I am conceptualizing a way um, to work that into the art style, so that it's rather reminiscent of early 19 teens and 20s filmmaking, when a color filter would be applied to the camera to denote or imply different times of day or different feelings. For instance, a yellow filter making everything into sort of a yellow scale, uh, to denote daytime or joy or that kind of thing, or a dark blue to denote nighttime or sorrow, or darkness of the soul. So I do plan on incorporating that into the art style. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, this was an amazing episode. Thank you for sharing all your ideas for this graphic novel project and the amazing ideas that you'll be putting down to pencil and in artwork too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure. I have an absolute blast every time I record with y'all, and it's my pleasure.
Yeah, I can't wait for more updates to this project. It's very exciting.
Thank you so much. I look forward to sharing them with you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.